The Stranger Things Netflix problems killing TV shows, and why some experts argue it's actually for the best. After dominating the elections but caving on the shutdown, what's the future of the Democratic Party? And the truth about what's really happening with our kids and the news. We're talking about all of that and even more on your special Friday Philip DeFranco show, aka From the Bastards, where y'all take control. Where you send in questions and I do my Philip DeFranco show thing and turn it into a show for you. And today we start with Tony from Salt Lake, who's worried about this crazy situation with the kids and the news.
You got kids, I've got kids. I just want to know, like, at what age do you think it's appropriate to start talking about all this stuff that's happening in the world? Or do you just shelter them until they figure it out themselves? From parent to parent, what do you do?
So to Tony and you listening right now, I will always say when it comes to kids, what I do for my kids, I'm not necessarily saying is going to work for your kids. Also, for this specific situation, it's a little bit different. I'm in the news and commentary space. My kids also think that it's cool that I'm a YouTuber, so they're interested in my job. And so they end up being kind of connected to that, and they overhear things with myself and Lindsay talking about politics. And I am going to get to my answer, but I'm also going to do my Philip DeFranco show thing and talk about the research and the data here. Because it's basically inevitable if kids are on social media platforms and streaming sites that they're going to have some kind of exposure to the news. In news exposure, it starts incredibly early, because even though, these social media sites, they have the minimum age of 13, surveys have found that almost 40% of children between the ages of 8 and 12 use social media. Right? And other research shows that 6 in 10 kids in that same age group, they use YouTube and TikTok every day, and nearly 2/3 of kids 8 to 10, they spend up to 4 hours a day on social media. And those numbers just get bigger and bigger as they get older. Right? Pew data from this year found that 9 in 10 teens aged 13 to 17 use YouTube, and around 60% use both TikTok and Instagram. And then with social media, a majority of teens say they get at least some kind of news from these platforms. Because again, even if they're not explicitly looking for news, they're going to stumble across it. And research shows that most adults, they see some kind of news on social platforms, even if they're not intentionally looking for it, like through opinion or humor-based content. Because you can say you hate politics, but politics is everything and everything is politics. And every day you see social media surpassing mainstream news outlets. A lot of news creators, they intentionally gear their content towards younger audiences, right? They're overtaking journalists day in, day out, and the algorithms, they drive this, right? Half of all teens who viewed news on YouTube, they say the platform itself recommended that content. This can be a good thing, but also it can be a very, very bad thing if they lack media literacy. Right? Experts say, and it feels like common sense to think, that kids are more susceptible to online misinformation. In fact, the News Literacy Project found that only 2 out of 10 teens correctly identified different kinds of information like news, advertisements, opinion, and entertainment. Also, you've got research showing that teens are more likely to believe conspiracy theories online than adults, and more than a quarter of kids who consume news online were fooled by fake stories. Though also I'll say, like with the AI boom, fake content, and misinformation, it's getting harder for everyone to identify. And then also I'll say, in addition to news in general, as far as like just being on social media, like adults, there are concerns that when kids are overexposed to news and they're doom scrolling, they can become anxious and depressed. But even that's different because you've got these young minds getting molded. They have fewer coping mechanisms. So, my personal belief is, I think it does make sense to talk news, but I usually let them ask me first. But again, my situation is different. My wife and I are constantly talking about politics. I do it for my job. She's getting into like actually running for office. And I do think that as a parent, you need to be there to have those conversations, and you can make a personal judgment if you want to be the one that starts it on a certain topic. Right? Kids these days, they're hyper connected. Something's going to be said at school and it's going to come home. And if you do not raise your kid, the school or the internet will. And so also generally with that, I think it's important to teach having a healthy skepticism, not, keeping such an open mind that your brain falls out, but a healthy skepticism. And part of that is teaching media literacy. And right now, very few states actually require schools to teach news literacy, and only 39% of teens report having had media literacy instruction. Right? And so then with all that, you have experts saying that there are a number of steps that parents could take. They can discuss the news openly with kids once they're mature enough, while filtering topics or details that they might not be ready for. Redirect them towards reliable sources like Elon Musk's Grokpedia. I'm joking. But direct them towards reliable sources and teach them how to determine when a source is credible. Explain how news operates differently on social media. Teach them how to have a healthy relationship with social media. If you can. I know a lot of people, myself is included in this sometimes, have a hard time breaking away from devices. So with all this, I can't speak to a specific age, but what I will say is like my oldest son, he is in 5th grade, and he is constantly asking me questions based off of stuff that he's hearing at school. Though also with him, I'll say I love the conversations because it feels a little bit like an information exchange, because I'll info dump on any of the political stuff that he's asking me about, but then he info dumps about he loves the Artemis moon missions. I got a little, and I mean this with love, a little space nerd on my hands. But talk to your kids, and I don't want to gender everything, but definitely talk to your young boys, because if you do not raise them, someone else will. We see that fucking everywhere. We're going to dive into more in a second, but let me take a second to thank a sponsor and say, you ever overdraft by $5 and your bank acts like you've committed tax fraud? Because yeah, that's why today's sponsor, Current, exists. It's the banking app for people who are tired of getting slapped with fees for just living. With Current, you can get a paycheck advance up to $750. That could be the difference between peace of mind and scrambling to make rent. I mean, I've been there before. Or maybe you go over a little. Current's fee-free overdraft, it gives you up to $200 of breathing room. No surprise fees, no judgment. Or maybe you're waiting on payday. With Current, you can get your paycheck up to 2 days early because bills don't care about your schedule. And for me, this is a big thing. Do you want to build credit without leaning on cards? Because the Current Build card, it helps you raise your score safely. I mean, users see an average 80-point jump in 6 months. Plus, you can also earn 4% on savings and use 40,000 plus fee-free ATMs nationwide. It's fast, it's flexible, and it's built for 2025, not 1995. So scan that QR code or head to current.com/Phil and use code Phil for $50 on us. Terms and conditions apply. For the next up, we've got Olivia, a federal employee who worked unpaid during the longest government shutdown in history, asking this.
I wanted to really ask you about what you see as the future of the Democratic Party. There's clearly been a pretty prolonged disconnect between the messaging of the Democratic Party and this kind of gravitation towards messaging towards the center, towards the moderates.
So there's a few things that we need to talk about when looking towards the future. Because this blue wave that we saw in the 2025 election cycle, it's kind of just further exacerbated divisions between the progressives and the moderate factions of the party after you got wins from both sides. Right, for many, it just kind of emboldened competing visions for the best strategies heading into the midterms. Right, in Virginia, you had Abigail Spanberger replacing the current Republican governor, and in New Jersey, you had the governorship staying blue in a competitive race, electing Mikey Sherrill. Both Spanberger and Sherrill, they ran very middle-of-the-road campaigns. They focused on the economy, public safety, and healthcare, while then also intentionally distancing themselves from the left wing of the party. But at the same time, in the most watched race of the year, you had 34-year-old Democratic Socialist Zoran Mamdani running on a patently progressive platform. And in addition to attracting massive national attention and winning, Mamdani spurred the biggest turnout in a New York mayoral election in more than half a century. He set a record for the highest early in-person turnout ever for a non-presidential election in New York. So you've got moderate Dems pointing to Spanberger and Sherrill's win, saying, hey, the path forward is centrist. That's how you combat Trump. That's how you win elections in 2026 outside of New York. But establishment strategists, they claim that progressives, they've made the party unpopular by pushing agendas that are just too extreme for most Americans. And with that, you had analysts noting that Spanberger and Sherrill were able to win statewide elections in 2 states that more accurately reflect the American people, arguing that Mamdani, he lost in parts of New York that more closely resemble the rest of the country. And with that, you have moderates arguing that those further left of center, they're not going to be able to win against Republicans in key swing states. Right, states that are not only for a presidential election, but these districts that'll determine control of the House and the Senate. And some even argue against supporting even further left candidates in places where they win, like Mamdani. And that over concerns that Republicans will present progressives as far left extremists or communists and paint them as the leaders of the party. And that's a thing that they're already trying with Mamdani. Though there, I would interject that the Republicans are going to do that no matter what. Right? Whether it be libs at TikTok or Fox News, if they're not going to try and paint Mamdani as something, they're just going to find some fucking random person on TikTok and be like, this is all Democrats. Right? You've got Republicans going on TV saying like, they're trying to force your kids to turn trans. I mean, the president of the United States is like, the Democrats want trans for everyone. Right? And so there's all of that, but then, you have leftists arguing that Mamdani's mass appeal and the energy that he galvanized all over the country, it shows the American public's desire for more populist and progressive policies. They claim that public support for more left-leaning ideals is evidenced by other progressives like Bernie Sanders and AOC, who have toured around the country promoting their ideals to massive audiences. And with that, you've seen strategists saying, the old guard of the Democratic Party, it's become unpopular and fallen out of touch with the modern realities of what Americans need. And with all this, as Bernie Sanders argued, New York is obviously different than Boise, Idaho, but I kind of think that with proper leadership and courage, what's happening in New York, in fact, can happen all over the country. And I suspect I'm not the only one who thinks that. I think Donald Trump understands that. I think the Democratic establishment understands that. I think that's what they're afraid of, right? And with all this, you've had the likes of AOC urging the machine to embrace progressives, right? Arguing that different factions can coexist within the party. So with all that, I'm personally of the mindset that, yeah, I think Democrats should not be afraid to embrace more progressive ideals. And when I say that, a number of those ideals are actually things that I think Donald Trump falsely tried to claim. Because while a lot of the stuff that he's doing is really just protecting and further enriching really rich motherfuckers, a lot of the stuff that he pushed were these populist ideals. Like he pushed himself as the no more wars, peacetime, stuff's gonna be cheaper and more affordable president. Meanwhile, almost all the stuff he's done hasn't helped or actively hurts the people that are kind of average Joe Blow or vulnerable. I was talking about this on the Crashing Out podcast with myself and Alex Perlman, but like the median age for a first-time home buyer is now like 40 years old. The ladder's been pulled up on young people in this country. When you remove opportunity and or even hope for opportunity from young people, you're not going to have a great outcome, right? And so you can't just say Trump bad, but you need to have policies that are like, hey, stuff's expensive. This is how we're going to try to address that. Hey, owning your own home, that appears out of reach. How are we going to address that? Uh-oh, you got sick or some horrible thing could be just around the corner. How are we going to deal with that? And, looking forward to the midterms, a recent poll found that Democrats are far more enthusiastic about the midterms following the 2025 elections, where you had 47% of registered voters saying they'd vote for the Democrat in their district if the elections were held today, while 42% would vote Republican. Also, 67% of Democrat or Democratic-leaning independents said that they were extremely motivated to vote next time, much higher than the 46% of Republican-aligned voters. And notably, that's also while the Democratic Party's approval is still very, very low. I mean, it's hovering around 33%. And again, I'm not saying all Democrats everywhere need to go full Mamdani, but I mean, there was a new survey, for example, from YouGov. They found that many of Mamdani's top progressive policies are actually very popular nationwide. Most popular were his proposals on raising taxes on millionaires and corporations. Nearly 7 out of 10 people, they said they supported that idea, and that including 4 out of 10 self-identified Republicans. So to kind of try to put a bow on this, I think more populist ideas are the way forward. It's why in the past you've had the same people that voted for AOC having voted for Donald Trump. And even from these last elections, the moderates, they were talking about things like affordability and healthcare. And I think it's important to keep those things in mind because, well, yes, a lot of people separate themselves based off if they're a D, an I, an R. There are a lot more issues that align everyone together when it's the have-nots versus the haves, especially as the room between those who have and those who do not has grown over the years more and more. But then next up, we've got Charles from Florida who said that he's been enjoying my podcast with Alex Perlman. That's right, always plug Crashing Out, go watch it. But also with that, he told us about what he's been crashing out about.
Entertainment such as television shows being only 8 to 10 episodes long and not really. Now it's just 7, 8 episodes, you're done. And if it gets a second season, it's like, 2 or 3 years later.
So this is actually interesting, right? I see a lot of people raging about this. I have at times raged about this. But, from the 1960s into the mid-2010s, right, it was normal for TV shows to have 20 plus episodes a season. But, the rise of streaming services has changed everything because shows no longer have to abide by the network TV content schedules. And so, making shows with fewer episodes, it helps save money. And for streaming services, it makes sense to invest more money in a wide variety of shorter shows than a few longer ones. I'd almost think of it as like a cheesecake factory menu. They're trying to make sure they can offer as much different varieties of slop as possible. But that also might be too critical. I'm not sure. I don't mind a Cheesecake Factory outing now and then. Right, give me a Skinnylicious pasta, a Skinnylicious marg. I'm feeling like a bad bitch. But what was I talking about? I should also know that things are constantly changing, right? Season lengths for streamed shows, they've also shortened more and more over the years. And yes, because everything's now become interconnected, it's even spread to broadcast TV. The data definitively shows that the number of episodes per season for scripted shows, it's shrunk in the last few years. Right, from 2018 to 2023, the average number of network episodes per season fell from 15 to 10, while for streaming shows, it went from 11 to 9. And as far as like the time between seasons, I will say, yes, that has also gotten larger. Well, all the production issues and the pandemic happened, and then of course there was the strikes. Yeah, it's hard not to notice things like Squid Game and Wednesday, big Netflix headliners having nearly 3-year-long breaks between their first and second seasons. Also, of course, famously, Stranger Things, they went from just over a year between seasons 1 and 2 to then 3-year gaps in production between each of the last 2 seasons. Millie Bobby Brown was 12 years old when the series started. She has a whole ass baby now. And while, Game of Thrones, they produced a new season almost every year, now HBO consistently runs a 2-year break between seasons to accommodate the productions like The Last of Us. Hell, Apple TV's Severance, they had a 3-year hiatus between seasons 1 and 2, and the 3rd season's not expected until 2027. And then with that, as far as like, why is it taking so long? Well, there are a number of arguments. A number of the shows are, high quality in creation and production. So when that's the case, it's more similar to producing a series of long movies rather than traditional TV. Also, a thing I'll say is that network shows, they're usually or have been more episodic. Right? Each episode, it stands on its own in a loosely connected season. But now more often in the age of streaming, you have a kind of a more narrative-driven, overarching story over a course of a season. So, those can take longer to produce. Also, as far as production, a lot of these big budget shows, they're kind of, heavy on production, complicated sets, heavy CGI. Also, you then have to think about the talent. Shows with A-list celebrities, writers, directors, or kind of other top-tier creatives, you have to work around their schedules. But, with all of this, it's not me defending the changes, right? And while a lot of that, it maybe explains it, it doesn't mean that everyone has to be good with it. In fact, critics have been very critical of the normalization of what we've been seeing. People arguing that these big breaks, they're bad for audiences who forget what happens season to season. They lose interest in the shows. Looking into it, there's some data that indicates that delays lead to a falling viewership overall in certain cases. Also separate from the viewers, the growing trend to shorter seasons with longer breaks. It harms people working in the film industry. In a lot of writers' rooms, they've been scaled down to smaller staffs or shorter periods of time. And actually, production jobs have decreased. One report found that in 2024, entertainment jobs were 25% below the level they were at in 2022. But with all that said, one of the reasons that you're probably not going to see a change here is that this trend doesn't appear to be hurting the streaming platforms themselves. And in fact, some data actually shows that productions with long breaks still perform very well, with the wait driving up anticipation, which boosts viewership, right? And with that, there have been Netflix shows that take several years to produce between seasons, still breaking streaming records. And so, while a large part of this was me explaining why, I empathize with the frustration. I personally find myself bouncing between, having two minds on this, right? A different thing that I think on and I sometimes struggle with is binging versus the weekly release. Sometimes I love when a whole season of something drops. I'm like, oh my God, thank you for making my Saturday. I wanted to have a lazy one. But then also there are times where I like the weekly release. I'm like, oh, that's my Thursday show. I got something to look forward to that night. But then I think a lot of that depends on, is it like a 22-minute show or is it an hour-long show? Where as of filming this, I watched the first 2 episodes of Pluribus, and I don't mind that being a weekly release. Or with it being weekly, it feels like there's more time to dissect the episode, have conversations with other people that watch the show. But I also don't think I would feel that same way with a show like Loot. But hey, where I want to end this is with kind of a few things. 1, if you like it in this episode on Friday, let me know. Hit that like button. 2, if you have any thoughts, opinions, reactions to any of the questions or my takes here, let me see those in the comments down below. 3, if you want to send in a question of your own to be answered, I've got a link in the description for you. That said, thank you for watching. If you want more to watch right now, I've got my brand new podcast crashing out right here. Or if you missed last night's DeFranco show, I got you covered right here. Thank you for watching. I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here on Monday.